Welcome back to another Faith on Friday. This would be episode 2 of this series within my Faith on Friday videos for the TV series The Chosen. We're going to go over episode 2 today. So episode 2 is episode on Shabbat, or the Sabbath day, for the traditional Sabbath day for the Jewish people. It's kind of the event that's taking place. And it starts off like many episodes do, or I think all the episodes do, with some sort of flashing back at various points in history. And so it goes back, some hundreds of years to a Shabbat in kind of like a nomadic tribal setting, and just them celebrating as it enters into the show itself. And this episode for me focused a lot on the tradition and holding tradition, not with negativity, but then also the power of now moments. And I think that is a big theme for all of our lives. It is, how do we honor a tradition, yet be open to now moments that can pivot and change our perspective of our tradition, or also set new traditions? And how also do we not lose tradition for what I would say would be our modern take on that only now moments matter. It's all about now. It's all about the moment now. And every new experience I have can instantly change my entire perspective on any history, on any of my history. And I'm willing to sometimes completely reinvent or be a whole new person or think a completely different way. And sometimes just completely burn whatever my previous thoughts and previous traditions were. We're going to see the characters again that we got introduced to: Simon and Andrew, Mary, Nicodemus, and we actually get more time in this episode, not a lot, towards the end though, with Jesus finally. So it's kind of fun in the show. It's like they really build up his character interaction, but really after this episode, episode 2, 3 through 8, Jesus is a main character. He's in there, and you're going to have a lot of interactions with him, with his chosen disciples, and with other people. For the idea of this intersection between tradition and pivotal moments, we're going to see Mary in the marketplace, and this isn't the Mary from episode 1, it's the Mary as the result of the end of episode 1. So you see somebody no longer tormented. There's a complete change of demeanor, and actually one of the Pharisees that would be under Nicodemus is there, and he sees her in the marketplace, and she just looks completely changed, completely different. He's very shocked, and he's going to go back to report to Nicodemus, which is going to spark a really amazing interaction between Nicodemus and Mary. As we see Nicodemus in this episode, he's studying demonology and exorcism, you would assume, because of what took place with Mary, and what took place is, in a sense, what couldn't take place under his own power has really shaken him, has really disturbed his traditional ideas and his focus on who is God and what is God's power, but also I think a self-evaluation, a re-evaluation of, I know all of this stuff and I know what God can do, but how come I have no power? Or also, how come this has so much power? So he's studying on it. Something in him has been shaken by a moment that he's had. So his tradition has been shaken by a moment, and he's trying to bring his tradition back to explain his moment. Our fun characters, Simon and Andrew, have gotten themselves into a pickle through a deal with Quintus, the overseer of that region in Judea, and they are having a little bit of an issue also with Matthew, the tax collector. Matthew's quirky character is getting more and more well developed even in this second episode, and so quickly, but you start to really catch on to who he is in this episode, and he's kind of going to tattle to Quintus because he doesn't trust Simon, and he thinks the deal that was possibly made is not a good deal for Quintus. And there's a really fun interaction. Matthew's guard is like, "You are insane, this guy is going to kill you just for talking to him." And we actually have a real fun interaction where Matthew's boldness and quirkiness actually catches the eye of Quintus, and he enjoys him in a very curious sort of way. And they do this throughout the show. The Roman presence is going to be there. There's obviously a negative idea about the Roman occupation. Lo and behold, historically, no one ever really likes any kind of ruling authority. No one really likes anyone over them. They And then there's levels of that authority. And within the Jewish culture, there's a lot of kind of bowing to the religious leaders and then their authority, and the people will spite them a little bit for that, kind of feeling oppressed by their own leaders and own people. But then they can also band together on their, well, there's also a greater oppression. And I think that is a theme of our life, and also a sign of maturity in life, when we start to find ourselves in our own voices, despite what we might call an oppression over us, or what we might call the circumstances that are outside of our control, or those people or things or places that seem to control our ability to, you know, mold and shape our life in exactly the way that we would hope for. So the Roman occupation, this though, is definitely seen as not positive, but they're not making the Romans out to be just completely tyrannically evil. They're a ruling body, so they're also doing their job and trying to rule a people they know do not like them, and rule in such a way as to keep order and peace. So there's a lot of other really good interactions in the show, and some good things that happen, like with Simon and Andrew and Matthew as well. But I want to just focus on kind of with the theme that I pulled from the show, which is this history, tradition, and now pivotal moments in life. So while Nicodemus is studying on the demonology, he gets summoned over to a little council, and he's told about Mary and what happened, and they're kind of giving him credit, like, hey, what you did, it didn't stick right away, but it seems to stick, and they want to do an inquiry. And he's like, well, let me go inquire. And he goes to Mary, finds her in the marketplace, and a really, really great interaction. Some of the best dialogue in the show takes place between the two of them, because he's so curious. He's wondering, what did I do? And Mary has to let him know, it's nothing you did, it was someone else. And that really captures him, because he wants to know, who is this? Who is this? Who did it? And Mary's like, I don't know who he is. Nicodemus is caught, like, how could someone do something like this? Because in his own mind, he's already established that this was beyond all human help. Only God could do something. So who is this that did something that I feel only God could do, yet then seeks no fame? And part of the religious leaders, there would have been a lot of seeking of fame, and the piety would have been, and the style of the garments they would wear. A lot of things were to be recognized for their very well earned knowledge, because they had a lot of knowledge and they were studying. They weren't all they shouldn't all be as vilified as were the Pharisees. They were like the pastors and leaders and teachers spiritually of the people. And they weren't as despised by the people as sometimes we would assert. And I was watching interviews with the director as well as his spiritual counsel, and they really emphasized that a lot of times a lot of bad rap for the Pharisees gets done because of our thoughts. But Nicodemus is talking with Mary, and then Mary gives him this line when he's trying to figure out who this person was. And I want to read the quote directly. I wrote it down during the episode. And in Nicodemus's curiosity, this is what Mary says back. You know, I don't know who he was, but all I know is that I was one way, now I'm completely different. And the thing that happened in between was him. I will know him for the rest of my life. So I was one way, but now I'm completely different. I was one way, I met Jesus. She doesn't say his name, but I'm completely different. Whatever it was that happened in between was him. And I'll know him for the rest of my life. That little interaction, Mary had a tradition. Then she had a moment, and that moment pivoted her. Now in this episode, Mary is also hosting her first Shabbat. So there's this pulling together that it's not like all of a sudden she's this new person with a whole new thing, and I'm following this guy now, and all of my history is gone. But everything in her history has now hit a pivot moment, and she has turned, and she knows everything will be different from this one moment. That even affects Nicodemus as he's going, and the show kind of ends with several Shabbats. We got Simon, Andrew, and Simon's wife, where he's going off to go fish on this day you're not supposed to be doing anything, and there's tension. You've got Nicodemus's, where it's very religious and it's very ornate and beautiful and traditional. And then you've got Mary's hosting of Shabbat, which is this person who has changed and is coming back to some roots. And she kind of fumbles through, doesn't quite know what she's doing. and she's having random people kind of coming over, the kind of people who wouldn't normally be invited to this celebration, maybe a little bit of ill repute. But Nicodemus is at his Shabbat, and I liked this as well. He is caught by his interaction with Mary, and as he's there, they're like, oh, you know, they're trying to honor him as if he is super important. And Nicodemus, what does he say? He says, gosh, they say, you make us whole. Like, oh, teacher, we're so glad you're here. You make us whole. And he kind of shoots back, only God can do that. Because he's seen something. He's been caught. He's been disturbed by this. And then finally, we go into Mary's Shabbat, and this is where Jesus shows up just randomly at her door. And he sits down, and there's a beautiful interaction with Jesus there where she's like, well, you're here now. You should host this. He's like, no, this is your home, and I'm honored to have you host it, to do it the way you would, as they are just quickly developing this character and personality of Jesus that they are showing based on their conviction of who Jesus is from the reading of the gospel. So what do we do with what it is that we know versus the real reality? As humans, we need to be growing and learning and developing ourselves. So what do we do with that? And I feel like this episode, it was a message that I pulled from it, is that, you know, the impact of moments does not have to also be the negating or the slash and burn of what you knew before. None of us can just live on island moments. We have to be growing, and the Bible would call it precept upon precept. So there's something that you grow upon. There's principle upon principle. You are who you are today, not just because of moments, but because of everything that's happened forward. And even those things that have happened from back forward will affect the way you process the moments now. But because that's true, doesn't mean we can't miss the sudden pivotal impact of a moment that will defy everything we know or defy our personality type. Personality tests and all those things are great, and they try to help us understand ourselves better, but they can also become a prison where we feel we can only interact with the world and we can only grow ourselves in a prison of a set personality type. This episode, from the spiritual side of things, this is the Faith on Friday, is emphasizing the pivotal moment of when our faith takes on legs bigger than tradition, not with the negating of our tradition, but with a making whole of it. So in a spiritual sense, you know, there's been many times in my life where, just as Mary said, I was one way. There's an interaction in my faith with Jesus as a Christian, and it changes, and I know I won't be the same as that moment. And I wish I could say those were moments that happened a long time ago, and I've just always been better since. But in God's grace, in my own failure in humanity, there's been lots of moments where I was one way, and then all of a sudden I'm different. And sometimes there's a feeling I've had like, man, it didn't stick. But it's not that it didn't stick. When the next moment hits, I realize the significance of the last moment, and I'm reminded of my own weakness as a human to live out anything perfectly. And I need lots of moments. But as I accumulate those moments, they become a history and a tradition, and they teach me lessons. I want to encourage you to check the show out, to also check yourself out. Think about all the things that you think of that have become your tradition, have become your mindset. If you don't have a religious or faith background, mine is Christianity, and so I look at the person and the work of Jesus, and my goal is to shape and model my life after that. I haven't always done it well, but it's become the heart and what I want to do with my life. So check the episode out, and, you know, share some comments about your thoughts on it. Hear my perspective, see if you find the same thing, see if you find something completely different. And we'll meet back next week and go over episode 3, which is just a super sweet episode. And maybe I can even have my kids involved in that episode, just because of that review, because of the nature of the episode itself. So I know these are a little different, and the energy is a little bit lower. It's early morning for me, but I want to thank you for checking it out. Subscribe, and most importantly, check the show out, so I'm not giving away any spoilers. But have a great day. Talk to you soon.